The author shares a beautiful quote: "There is joy in change. Without change, there is no progress." Consider this: if you perform the same tasks every day, you will not achieve new results. To change the outcomes, one must change the approach. Western philosophy suggests that surrendering to change is losing, while Eastern philosophy teaches that yielding is essential to conquering. Furthermore, the author compares humans to water, encouraging individuals to flow, adapt, and mingle with all that comes their way. Embracing change helps overcome anxiety and fear, initiating a process of growth and progress. Although our minds are programmed to resist change, known as homeostasis, we can reset our patterns. The author explains that visionary leaders must alleviate anxiety by reminding employees of the necessity and benefits of change. Sufficient knowledge about the change must be provided to alleviate fears. It is the leader's responsibility to cultivate a mindset among employees that perceives change as an opportunity for learning, growth, and success. Additionally, the author suggests that leaders should condition their employees to focus on the chosen activities and initiatives to reach new heights of success. Preparing oneself and making wise choices are crucial when facing change. Leaders must program their employees' minds to view change as an opportunity for learning, growth, and success in order to achieve high results. In this ritual, the author encourages leaders to ask themselves several questions to assess their ability to adapt to organizational changes. Have I accepted change positively? Have I seen change as an opportunity? Have I quickly learned new technology, plans, and operating rules? Have I taken people's concerns and doubts seriously? Have I admitted my personal mistakes, learned from them, and moved on? Am I optimistic to navigate change successfully in any organization? Leaders must first lead themselves through the transition process. This involves finding different ways to become more grounded, understanding the impact of change on oneself, and recognizing the impact of one's behavior on others. The author also shares 5 tips for leaders to adopt flexibility and embrace change within the organization. Be curious, maintain a sense of wonder as a leader, and ask questions before making judgments or decisions. Don't stick to one plan. Have alternate plans, such as Plan B and Plan C, to adapt to different situations and benefit the organization. Create a support system. Bring a team member to meetings as a support system, and give every team member an equal chance to participate and share ideas. Understand your own reaction to change. Clarify your thoughts about upcoming changes to communicate effectively with your employees. Immerse yourself in new environments and situations. Engage fully in the change process by connecting with new people, trying new things, and being an active part of the new team. By following these guidelines, leaders can enhance their adaptability and change management skills, creating a culture that embraces change, fosters growth, and drives success within the organization. Always remember that the growth of your company is directly proportional to the growth of your people. And at the end of one of my favorite quotes, "As you sow, so shall you reap." Ritual 5, the ritual of personal effectiveness. In this ritual, the author introduces his philosophy of time leadership and time management. He emphasizes that if you cannot lead your time, it will lead you. Furthermore, he states that the art of getting things done lies in knowing what needs to remain undone. This means that a leader must focus on necessary tasks while neglecting unnecessary ones. The author quotes Peter Drucker, stating, "Switch from being busy to achieving results." In this article, the author discusses the time model for visionary leadership. This model helps leaders take control of their time and emphasizes the importance of weekly planning practice. The author suggests dedicating at least half an hour on Sundays to planning the tasks for the upcoming week. To implement the plan effectively, the author outlines a 5-step practice: revisit your future vision. Align it with your annual goals. Break down your goals into smaller milestones or targets. Schedule and prioritize these milestones. Delegate tasks effectively and keep track of milestones achieved. Therefore, rather than waiting for the right time to come, leaders should list and plan their tasks for the next week and follow through with action steps. Ritual 6, the ritual of self-leadership. In this ritual, the author emphasizes the quote, "All leadership starts within." By improving, refining, and defining who we are, we see the world from the highest, most enlightened perspective. The author applies the principle of putting on your own oxygen mask first, as heard in emergency instructions on flights, to leadership. Introduction to the Teenage Brain. Introduction to the Teenage Brain. Been running groups for parents in which I outline the main facts about brain development. The result: parents talk about a light bulb moment. They report a complete change of attitude to their son or daughter. "Wow! I really didn't know all this," said one parent to me. "I will be so much more sympathetic now." Another said, "This will change the way I relate to my 15-year-old. Thank you," said another. "If only we had understood this earlier, so many problems might have been avoided." I believe that this knowledge really does have the potential to change family relationships. Of course, there are other factors at play. I will discuss these at various points during the book. One big factor is the social circumstances that affect all teenagers. At what point are they grown up? When can they take decisions for themselves? What rights do parents have over health and educational choices? These questions highlight the fact that the teenage years are a transition from child to adult. And transitions can be uncomfortable. There will be more about transitions in Chapter 2. I will show that it will be much easier to deal with the questions thrown up by the process of transition if we take into account the impact of the changes in the brain. I very much hope that you will find this information helpful in your relationships with the teenagers in your life. The brain is a mystery. It is also a thing of wonder. The human brain is the most complex entity in nature. It is quite small. You can hold it in your hands. It is an organ, but it acts as a machine, a controller, a manifestation of human evolution, and it is the single most determining feature of each and every one of us. It is a mystery because there is still so much we do not know about the brain. While neuroscience has made huge strides in the last 20 years, we are still at the very beginning of the search for a full understanding of the brain. Some writers call the brain the inner cosmos. This is because it has a capacity that is so vast and because it is mostly as yet unexplored. I call it a thing of wonder because the feats the brain performs are remarkable. Our brains manage our emotions, determine our actions, store our memories, create our dreams, help us deal with threats, and basically keep us alive by regulating temperature, blood levels, energy, and the sleep-wake cycle. In this chapter, I will explain, as clearly as I can, the basic processes that take place when we think, feel, relate, and respond to our environment. However, this book is about the teenage brain, so I also want to outline the key changes that occur during the adolescent years. Until quite recently, it was believed that the brain stopped developing at the end of childhood. We knew very little about what happens to the brain after puberty. Since the advent of scanning, the picture has changed completely. We now know that the brain undergoes major changes during the teenage years. These changes have profound implications for the way teenagers behave and the way they deal with the challenges of this stage of life. The brain contains billions of cells. You will have heard people talk about little gray cells. Your brain contains in the region of 80 billion little gray cells. These cells are known as neurons. This is an unimaginable number. In fact, The joke is that the human brain cannot comprehend that number of neurons. This is a number that is nearly 10 times more than the entire global population. All these billions of neurons are connected to other neurons in patterns and networks. We still know little about how these neurons combine together. It is hard to understand how the billions and billions of neurons can work together without getting into a tangle in the small space that is the human brain. All our bodily systems are powered by the oxygen in our bloodstream, and the brain is no exception. The brain also uses electrical and chemical processes to send messages along the pathways that connect the neurons together. These pathways are the nerve fibres that stretch across and around the brain. Each neuron has a number of nerve fibres reaching out to other neurons in the system. Messages or impulses are carried around the brain along these nerve fibres. One remarkable feature of the brain is that there is a tiny gap in the nerve fibre or branch that reaches out from every neuron. This gap is called a synapse, and it means that the message or impulse has to jump over the gap to reach the next neuron. This is an important part of the picture, and I will say more about the synapse in a minute. In order to understand the brain, we need to picture the different roles that various parts of it perform. As I said, the brain is immensely complex, so I will just concentrate on the most important sites. This will help you, the reader, to get a sense of the key elements of the structure of the brain. The first part I want to mention is known as the prefrontal cortex. This site is associated with thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. Some people like to call it the command and control center. It is located at the front of the brain and can be considered as the rational, sensible part of the brain which helps us think about the consequences of our actions. The second site to mention is the amygdala. This is located deep in the middle of the brain and is the part that processes and manages our emotions. The amygdala is that feature of the brain that determines our feelings, but it is also the site that is most affected by stress and difficult experiences. The third part of the brain to mention is the hippocampus. This is where memory is processed and stored for a short time until it is passed on to long-term memory. The synapse I have already mentioned the synapse. This tiny gap plays an important part in the story of the brain. Within this gap are what are known as neurotransmitters. They are essentially chemical messengers, as they help or hinder the sending of impulses along the nerve fibres. Another way to think about the synapse is to think of it as an on-off mechanism. The chemical messengers within the synapse are a bit like traffic lights, showing green to indicate go, or showing red to indicate stop. Some people liken this system to an air traffic control setup. I prefer to think about it as a railway network. If there was no signaling system, the trains would bump into each other and the system would come to a standstill. Imagine the multitude of neurons and networks all sending trillions of messages all the time in your brain. Without some form of signaling, there would be chaos. Take a moment to think about yourself while you are reading this. You are bombarded by an enormous number of stimuli. You could concentrate on the noises outside the room, the ache in one of your muscles, the memories you have about what happened at breakfast, the worries you have about the work you are meant to be doing, and so on. It is easy for us to become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of possible stimuli. We would not be able to concentrate or pay attention if we did not have a system for blocking out the distractions. This is especially important for young people in the classroom. The on-off mechanism is essential if they are to concentrate. And yet, there are those who find this difficult. For them, the mechanism is not working as well as it should. We will return to this topic later in the book. Scanning the last 20 years have seen a gigantic leap forward in our understanding of the human brain. This is because of the development of the technology of scanning. It is now possible to take pictures of the brain as it functions, without any distress or discomfort. In previous years, this would have been considered impossible. The technology is known as brain imaging, or, to be technical, magnetic resonance imaging (MRI). What does this mean? This technology allows us to see how much oxygen is going to different parts of the brain at any one time. This is a huge advance, as it enables us to see which parts of the brain are active under different conditions. However, scanning can only tell us so much. It does not tell us what a person is thinking. There is also a limit to what we can tell about how the different networks combine and work together. It is worth noting that, even in the last decade or so, there have been huge advances in the technology of scanning. In the early days, the process would have involved the individual lying on a bed and going into a tunnel. This would have been quite noisy and would have required the person to lie still for about 30 to 40 minutes. As a result, you could not use the technology in the classroom or when the person was moving around. Recently, the technology has advanced, so that mobile scanners are now available. This means that we can learn more about brain activity in a wider range of circumstances, and with a wider range of individuals. The changing teenage brain. It is now time to turn to the changes that take place during the teenage years. The adolescent period can be a confusing and contradictory time of life. The young person is growing and changing. While the individual is still a child, he or she is also becoming an adult. This period is a major transition. I like to say that inside every teenager is both a child and an adult. This contradiction means that things are often topsy-turvy. The young person can be happy and sad, grown up and needy, all at the same time. Most importantly for us, this contradiction is reflected in the brain. On the one hand, the brain is maturing, allowing the young person to develop new skills and capabilities. On the other hand, the brain is also undergoing a major reorganization, leading to times of confusion and uncertainty. I will deal with the positives first. All parts of the brain will mature during the years from puberty onwards. This maturation leads to increased skills and capacities in all areas, whether these be physical abilities, sexual maturation, or cognitive functions. As you may imagine, one of the key areas here is the prefrontal cortex. It is this part of the brain which is most active during the learning process. Maturation here allows for better memory, improved vocabulary, and the development of scientific reasoning. Better communication skills will also be developing. Adults sometimes find this hard to comprehend, but watching young people with their friends makes this plain to see. In addition to the maturation of the brain, other things are happening, too. During the period around puberty, there is an overproduction of neurons and connections. At first sight, this may seem a strange thing to happen. In fact, this has happened earlier in childhood as well. What happens then is known as pruning. More neurons than can be accommodated have been produced, and as a result the brain allows the unwanted neurons and connections to die away. In the long run, this leads to a positive outcome. We sometimes say it leads to a meaner, leaner machine. It is inevitable that this process leads to a significant restructuring and reorganization of the brain. Some scientists reckon that, on average, the brain loses 17% of the gray matter during the teenage years. Imagine what you would think if I were to tell you that you were going to lose so much of your brain in the next few years. It is a daunting thought. And it is no wonder that the process leads to times of confusion and uncertainty. As I have said, the outcome is positive. It allows the brain to function more efficiently. However, there is some cost in the process of actually getting there. One other fact should be considered here. This has to do with the role of hormones. I am going to devote a whole chapter to hormones, chapter 3. For the present, however, I do need to outline something of the way that hormones play a part in the changing brain. This is a period when there is an upset in the hormone balance. Readers will know that the teenage years are sometimes described as a time of raging hormones. We can see this in common behaviors such as mood swings and the flip-flop of emotions. One of the things we have learned as a result of research on the teenage brain is that there is a marked level of variation in the hormone balance in this age group. All of us have some daily variation in the balance of hormones in our brains. The variation for teenagers, however, is much greater than for other age groups. Thus, the level of any of the key hormones may be going up or down to a significant extent in any one 24-hour period. It is not surprising, then, that this affects behavior and means that emotion regulation is that much harder for young people. How does the brain mature? How does the brain mature? I have talked about maturation, but what does this actually mean? How does the brain mature? There are a number of processes that contribute to this. In the first place, I need to mention myelin. This is an extremely important substance that surrounds, encases, and protects the nerve fibers. It also ensures that they remain separate from each other. If you remember how many neurons there are, and thus how many nerve fibers, you can see that it is essential to have a means of preventing the billions of fibers from getting tangled up. As for maturation, during the teenage years, the myelin gets thicker. Clearly, this is at an infinitesimal level, but nonetheless the myelin gets thicker. This enables impulses to travel round the brain faster and more efficiently. This process takes some years, but it contributes significantly to a more mature and effective brain. The second element that contributes to maturation has to do with the way both halves of the brain work together. One thing I haven't mentioned before is that the brain is in two halves. Why the human brain has two halves is a mystery, but there it is. Sometimes known as hemispheres, these two halves have to work together, and in order for this to happen, there is a bridge between the two halves, which is how they are connected. During the teenage years, this bridge undergoes a major change. The connections between the two halves gradually increase, so that more information can be passed across. This also means that the individual can make use of greater brain capacity. This feature of the brain is known as connectivity. In essence, the more connectivity there is, the better the person's thinking abilities. If we want to understand intelligence, then we need to look at connectivity. In earlier times, it was believed that the size of a person's brain was a clue to their intelligence. We now know that this belief is false. Intelligence is not related to size, but to the connectivity between the two halves of the brain. I should make one last point about maturation. During the teenage years, maturation does not occur equally across different parts of the brain. In fact, the brain matures from back to front. This is important, because it means that the prefrontal cortex, the site of thinking and reasoning, is maturing at a slower rate than other sites in the brain. Of course, the prefrontal cortex is maturing, but it is just maturing more slowly than other parts of the brain. When the first research studies started appearing in the early 2000s, these findings led scientists to argue that they had found the reason why some teenagers were likely to take risks. We have now learned that this is much too simple an explanation. I will be talking a lot more about risk and risk-taking in Chapter 3. The brain and the environment. Brain and the environment. What determines the way the brain develops? This is a perennial question. Is it down to the person's genes? Is the structure of the brain set from the very early years? How does the environment make a difference to the way the brain develops in the teenage years? Do early experiences have later consequences? I consider this to be a central question, but it is not an easy one to answer. The first important thing to note is that the brain and the environment interact. Each has an influence on the other. The environment has an effect on brain development, but the capacity of the brain will influence the way the individual responds to circumstances. As one example of this, it is probable that enriching environments lead to healthier brain development. On the other hand, environments that are restricted in one way or another are likely to hinder brain development. This was a question that scientists were asking in the 1960s, when I was at university. We were taught about studies that placed rats in two different environments. One was full of toys and stimulating experiences, while the other environment was bare and Spartan. The results were clear. The rats brought up in the stimulating environment were quicker learners and performed better at solving puzzles and finding their way around mazes. In recent times, the experiences of Romanian orphans have given us a real-life opportunity to study this question. Readers may remember that, during the Ceausescu era in Romania, orphans were placed in extremely restricted environments, left in their cots with very little human contact. Many in the West have offered to adopt these orphans, and this led to a number of natural experiments. In the UK, the Institute of Psychiatry in London, led by Professor Michael Rutter, studied these orphans as they grew up, went to school and developed into teenagers. The results are fascinating. I will just mention two main findings. Firstly, the earlier the orphans were adopted, the easier it was to overcome the early deprivation. Those adopted before the age of 1 did better than those adopted between 2 and 3 years of age. This makes sense, as those adopted at a young age had a shorter experience of deprivation, and presumably there was less damage to the developing brain. Those adopted later, however, also showed the capacity to recover. This group were able to make good relationships with their adoptive parents and were able to perform adequately at school. In spite of this, there remained some challenges for those adopted after the age of 1. Once they got to secondary school, they struggled with friendships and showed other signs of finding it hard to adapt to changing circumstances such as the move to a new school. One other strand of work casts some light on this question. In recent years, a number of studies have looked at teenage brain development in those who had been the subject to what are known as ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. Under this heading are usually included abuse, bereavement, rejection, and other types of trauma. Results of these studies do show that, in some young people, early experiences lead to altered brain function. However, studies also show that the brain has the capacity to recover. Where the individual receives strong support and care, it would appear that earlier disadvantages can be overcome. From all this, we can conclude that the environment really does make a difference. One key aspect of the environment for young people is, of course, the adults who surround them. This is an important message. Adults have a key role to play. All the research shows that outcomes for young people are very much affected by the support and engagement that is available from the adult world. This applies whether you are a parent, carer, teacher, or other practitioner. The brain and the environment interact, and we will explore the ways in which this works over the course of this book. Conclusion. I started this chapter by indicating that I will approach the teenage years from the perspective of the changing brain. I said that this might be a surprise to readers. However, I believe that knowing what happens in the brain leads to a complete change in the way we understand teenagers. In this chapter, I have covered the main changes that occur during the adolescent period. I have discussed scanning and outlined what it means to say the brain is maturing. I have discussed the relation between the brain and the environment, and showed that each influences the other. One young man said to me, "So, my brain is changing. Nothing much I can do about it. Then I was able to reassure him. The brain is not fixed. The environment makes a difference. There is a lot